Today's podcast is about a mysterious death. A teenager goes to a party but doesn't come home from it. He goes missing but is eventually found days later. However, finding him would create an even bigger mystery, one that has endured for almost 45 years. Let's talk about Kurt Sova. Kurt Sova was born on July 15, 1964 to Kenneth and Dorothy Sova. They lived at 6519 Hosmer Avenue in Cleveland. Kurt had three older brothers, Kevin 22, Kenneth 21, and Keith 20. Kurt was 17 and a junior at South High School in Cleveland. Kurt was described as an above-average student. He had initially wanted to play varsity football, but was unable to because of a knee injury. Dorothy Sova said that Kurt spent most of his time with his friends, building models or playing the guitar in the family home. Kurt, being the youngest, was doted on by his mother. She referred to him as her baby. He was close with his parents and enjoyed spending time with them. But Kurt had another side that his parents were apparently not aware of. According to his friends, like a lot of teenagers, Kurt would sometimes drink alcohol and smoke marijuana on the weekends. This will play a significant factor in our story. On Friday, October 23, 1981, Kurt skipped school and went to a liquor store. While there, he persuaded an adult to buy him a fifth of Everclear, which is about a 25-ounce bottle. Reportedly, he then went to his girlfriend's house and drank throughout the afternoon. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with what Everclear is, but in case anyone isn't, Everclear is a very strong grain alcohol that is advised to never drink straight due to its potency. It is more than twice as potent as standard spirits and is extremely flammable. The type that Kurt was reported to be drinking that day was 190 proof, which is 95% alcohol. Currently, the sale of that strength of Everclear is banned in 15 states. Kurt was on his way to a local carnival when he ran into his friend Samuel Carroll, who was on his way to a Halloween party. Kurt didn't know the host, but decided to join his friend, and the two would attend the party at the home of Debbie Sams and her brother Clayton. They, along with another roommate, Susan, rented a duplex at 2717 Harvard Avenue in Newburgh Heights, a suburb of Cleveland. This was less than 2 miles from Kurt's house. Kurt continued drinking at the party and began to stumble and knock things over. He started to get sick, and the roommate asked Samuel Carroll to please get him out of the house. His friend complied, and he helped Kurt get down the stairs. They were out there 20 to 30 minutes, only wearing t-shirts, and they both began to get cold. He went to go get their jackets, and his friend said that he was only upstairs for 2 or 3 minutes, but when he came back, Kurt was gone. Samuel Carroll then roamed nearby side streets and checked the parking lot of a J.L. Goodman furniture warehouse for his friend. He then assumed that Kurt had gone home, so he returned to the party. He said that since his friend had disappeared so quickly, he could only guess that someone had to have picked him up in a car. Dorothy Sova was starting to worry when her son didn't come home. It wasn't like him to stay out past 10 p.m. She drove to several of Kurt's usual hangouts. But Kurt Sova wouldn't come home that night. By dawn, and with no trace of their son, the Sovas were panicking. They enlisted about 40 family and friends, and they spent Saturday, divided into teams, in a search that included alleys, ravines, and dumpsters. The family was unsuccessful in their search, and Kurt Sova was officially reported missing to the Cleveland police on Sunday morning. Kurt's brothers printed up flyers and put them up all over the neighborhood. The Sovas would soon learn from Samuel Carroll about the party that Kurt attended at the duplex. They would also learn of the impaired state that Kurt was in when he was last seen. They didn't know their son to drink in excess, but did believe that he was probably drinking at the party on the night that he went missing. Dorothy Sova would soon go and confront the residents of the duplex where the party was held. First, they denied having a party or that they saw Kurt Sova that night. However, a pizza delivery man confirmed delivering pizzas there that night and said that there was definitely a party. After being confronted with that, they would admit to having the party and would also admit that Kurt did stop by, as well as over a dozen others. She said that most of them were older than Kurt and people that he didn't know. Susan also said that Kurt was drinking heavily. None of his family or friends knew him to do that. The Sovas did find Kurt's jacket there, but no other significant clues or leads. The Sovas would repeatedly visit the duplex so much that it was considered harassment, and Sheriff Lucas would eventually order them to stay away from the house. One of the flyers the family put up was in a Cleveland record shop. The owner of Village Record Store, Judy Oros, was approached by a homeless man who had been hanging out there for the last couple of weeks. He bragged about having access to bodies flown into Cleveland Hopkins International Airport and bragged about removing shoes from the bodies. He pointed to a Kurt Sova missing flyer and said, "They're going to find him in 2 days and they're not going to know what happened to him." Police would question the mysterious man and determine that he had a mental illness and did not know of Kurt's whereabouts. A few days after Kurt went missing, the woman who had the party phoned Dorothy Sova at 3:30 in the morning. She said that someone was sleeping in her basement and that maybe it was Kurt. Dorothy was confused at her being forthcoming with information now, after having initially denied even having a party or Kurt attended. Ken Sova and his sons would rush over there. They agreed that it did look like someone could have been sleeping in the basement, but the cot was now empty, and there were no definitive signs of Kurt there. Later that same day, around 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, October 28th, 3 neighborhood boys cut behind the J.L. Goodman warehouse on Harvard Avenue in Newburgh Heights. As they passed through a ravine, they saw something that caught their eye. It was a body lying face up in a puddle just a few feet from where Kenneth Sova had searched the night before. The body was found in a ravine behind the J.L. Goodman Furniture Warehouse, which is located at 3201 Harvard Avenue in Newburgh Heights. The area where the body was discovered was only about 500 yards from the duplex where the party was. The police were notified, and it didn't take long to figure out the identity of the body. After missing for 5 days, Kurt Sova had now been found. When discovered, Kurt Sova's arms were outstretched in a Christ-like pose, head to one side, one knee slightly bent, and one foot atop the other. One of his tennis shoes was near the body, and the other one was missing. Ken Sova would soon hear about the body that was found and headed to the county morgue. What he saw was burned in his brain. In a heartbreaking account in a local newspaper, Ken Sova would explain that he wanted to see the body, so they pulled open the drapes. He felt bad because there was mud on Kurt's face, and they wouldn't let him wipe it off. He went on to say, "He looked cold. He looked so cold. He was lying there as if to say, 'Dad, I'm so cold. Take me home.'" He recalled that Kurt had a bruise on one cheek and numerous bruises on his shins. A few scratches and nicks were also found on his body. An autopsy was performed on Kurt's body. Coroner Samuel Gerber told the Cleveland Press that the cause of death was undetermined. He said, "We have not uncovered any evidence of violence whatsoever. There are no gunshot wounds, knife wounds, indications of a beating, traces of poisons or drugs." The coroner's office was baffled. As Dr. Adelson said, who also worked there at the time, "You can stop the machinery without damaging the machine." He would also quote a Sherlock Holmes line when referring to all the questions left unanswered by the autopsy findings. "You eliminate all other possibilities, and that which remains is the truth. This was a diagnosis by exclusion." The coroner's office said that Kurt's blood alcohol content was 0.11. That was slightly higher than Ohio's legal definition of being drunk, but was not near high enough to kill him. Tests for cocaine and LSD also came back negative. The coroner's determination was that Kurt had been dead for 24 to 36 hours when his body was found. He said that Kurt apparently died elsewhere and that his body was later dumped at the ravine. Word spread quickly through the small community about Kurt Sova being found dead. Judy Oros, the Cleveland record store owner, was upset, and it was chilling that the homeless man's prediction had now come true. She was further rattled when she arrived at her store on Thursday morning and a fellow shop owner gave her a bouquet of flowers that the homeless man had left for her. There was also a card attached that read, "Roses are red, violets are blue. They found him dead, and they'll find you too." He would eventually return to the record store, but this time when he did, Judy Oros called the police. They interviewed him and determined that he had a mental illness, referring to him as a crazy from Detroit, and released him. Judy Oros never saw him again. Newburgh Heights PD would never interview the homeless man. With Sova's case at a standstill, just 3 months later, the neighborhood would be rocked with another tragic death. Eugene Cavett was in 6th grade at the same high school that Kurt Sova attended, and they only lived about 7 blocks from Kurt at 5800 Gertrude Avenue in Cleveland. Eugene's mother, Joan Welch, watched her son leave for school at 8 a.m. Monday, February 1st, 1982. When he didn't come home from school that afternoon, his mother reported him missing to the police. The next day, Tuesday, February 2nd, 1982, around 11 a.m., a young boy was cutting through a landfill just south of Arco Disposal at 7720 Harvard Avenue when he found a body at the base of a cliff in the landfill. It was soon determined to be the body of 13-year-old Eugene Cavett. His autopsy would reveal that he had a fracture at the base of his skull and cuts and bruises consistent with a fall. According to Eugene's neighbor, Cecilia Gailey, Eugene caught the bus Monday for school, but his family told her that he never made it to school. The neighbor would go on to say that Eugene Cavett had a mild case of muscular dystrophy. Prior to the Monday morning sighting, she said that the last time she saw him was on Sunday when he was shoveling snow for a neighbor. It was strange that a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old, who lived just 7 blocks from each other, would both be found dead under strange circumstances just 3 months apart. But it wasn't thought that the deaths were connected. There really isn't much information out there about Eugene Cavett's death, just an article around the time he was found. But fast forward to 2010, when I was moderating the Sitcoms Online board under Crystal Dawn. I was contacted by a friend of Eugene Cavett who told me some interesting information that I wanted to share. He said that he and Eugene would sometimes skip school and meet at the tracks about 500 feet from the falls near where his body was found. He said that where he was found was in a bad area, and a Cleveland-based gang called BCO, Brick City Outlaws, had been bothering them a lot. The friend that contacted me had gotten sick that day and couldn't meet Eugene. He wonders if the gang could have something to do with Eugene's death. However, officially, Eugene Cavett's death has been ruled accidental, and his case is closed. Ken and Dorothy Sova would write to Unsolved Mysteries asking them to air their son's case. They agreed, and the segment would first air on November 23, 1988. There were interviews with Ken and Dorothy Sova, law enforcement, the record store owner, interviewed with her identity hidden due to fear. They mentioned the death of Eugene Cavett on there as well. There was also an audio interview with a friend of Kurt's who had an interesting story. His name was David Trusnick, and he would claim that he saw Kurt Sova alive and well 3 days after he disappeared, which was 2 days before his body would be found. Trusnick said that Kurt and another boy were walking down a busy street less than a mile from his home. He pulled over to attempt to give them a ride. Before he could, though, a van pulled up and Kurt yelled "Franco," and the 2 boys got in the van. Trusnick said that he was unaware at the time that Kurt was missing, so there was no reason to notify anyone of the sighting. He said that if he had known, he could have followed the van. It is still unknown whether Trusnick's sighting was valid or whether he got confused with the date that he saw Kurt. However, I did come across someone who lived in Newburgh Heights just a few years older than Kurt with the last name of Franco. To be clear, we don't know if Kurt Sova even knew this Franco person, but he did live in the same small town of the party that Kurt attended around the same time. His name was Craig Franco, and sadly, he would be murdered just a little over a month after Kurt Sova was found dead. Franco was a gas station attendant at the Sova service station at Carnegie and 9th in Cleveland. On December 3, 1981, he was counting the day's receipts around 11:30 p.m. when he was shot in the head and killed during an apparent robbery attempt. The killers apparently didn't even enter the service station, but shot through the locked glass door. Craig Franco was talking to a friend on the phone just before his murder. The last thing he told her was, "There are two people by the side door." And then she heard a sound. Soon after that, a customer arrived and saw Franco lying on the floor in a puddle of blood. He was killed instantly. Police would eventually get a tip in Franco's case that led them to Frances Johnson. She was already in prison, having been convicted of killing her husband, Robert Johnson. His body, full of stab wounds, was fished out of the Columbus River in late 1981. Frances Johnson's former boyfriend, Gerald Raines, was also convicted of Robert Johnson's murder. After receiving the tip, police would interview Frances Johnson. She would ultimately confess to Franco's murder. After she and her boyfriend killed her husband, they eventually fled Cleveland and traveled to California. But before they left town, Frances Johnson apparently murdered Craig Franco. Frances's boyfriend testified that he was in the car and heard a gunshot, but didn't see anything. Frances Johnson would plead down to manslaughter and aggravated robbery, and on April 9, 1987, was sentenced to 5 to 25 years for the crime to run concurrently with her existing sentence for her husband's murder. There was another witness in the Kurt Sova case that Newburgh Heights PD did not talk to, but she did not come forward at the time of the disappearance. But she does have a very interesting story to tell. Angeline Reddick said that she was looking out a window in her house on Washington Park Boulevard just before Halloween. She saw two males dragging what appeared to be an unconscious teenage boy down the alley toward the ravine where Kurt's body was later found. She said that one foot was barefoot, she thinks the right one. She said that she just figured it was a couple of teenagers with a couple of beers too many trying to sober up. A few days later, Reddicks would hear about Sova's death. She said that she never told the police because her husband told her that they should mind their own business. More than a year later, Reddicks would have a chance meeting with Ken Sova on the street and recount to him what she had seen. Dorothy Sova passed on the information to Newburgh Heights, but they never interviewed Reddicks. Dorothy Sova said the police didn't interview half the people that she told them about who came to her with information. In an eerie coincidence, just 4 months after Kurt's death and a few weeks after Eugene Cavett was found dead, another surprising death of a young person would occur not far away. 20-year-old Lisa Combs' partially clad body was discovered on March 12, 1982, dumped in a creek bed in nearby Bainbridge Township in Geauga County, Ohio. Like Kurt Sova, Lisa lived in Cleveland, and the area she was found in was only about 23 miles from the town where Kurt was found. She lived with her parents at 5715 Harvard Avenue, which is the same street where the party was held that night when Kurt went missing, and also near where his body was eventually found. However, with this victim, the manner of death was clear. Lisa Combs had been murdered. She'd been strangled at another location and then brought to the location where she was found. In addition to the strangulation, Combs also had numerous stab or bullet wounds in her chest. She had also been raped. The time that Lisa Combs was missing and unaccounted for before she was murdered seemed unclear. The police investigation would determine that Lisa was last seen around 2:30 a.m. on February 21st at the Trayman Club a tavern near her home. It does not appear that she was killed the same night she left the bar, but that is the last time friends or relatives had any contact with her. They believe that she was killed several days to a week before her body was found on March 12th. An investigation would reveal that Lisa had been at a different bar with two female friends, one of whom had a car. At around 2 a.m., Combs wanted to go to the Trayman Club, but the other two didn't, so she went alone. Lisa Combs lived near the club. Eventually, Alan Burgles was convicted of the robbery, kidnapping, and rape of Lisa Combs. It is believed that the two may have known each other. So now 4 young people, all who live relatively close to each other, were either murdered or died from unexplained circumstances within just a 5-month span. The question is, are any of them related? I don't really think so. One was a robbery, one was thought to be an accidental fall, one was a crime of opportunity and probably sexually motivated, and the other we are still trying to figure out. But as I came across these other cases, it was compelling enough that I wanted to mention them. With still no answers in her son's death, Dorothy Sova, feeling that Newburgh Heights PD was not doing a proper investigation, was tireless in her determination for answers. In subsequent years, she succeeded in getting 4 law enforcement agencies to look into the case. The other agencies all seemed to agree on the poor job that Newburgh Heights had initially done on the investigation. They said the original police file only consisted of 3 or 4 pieces of paper, along with 4 Polaroid photos of Kurt's body after it had been loaded on a stretcher, yet none of when he was initially found on the ground. There were no forensic specialists called to the scene, and they reiterated that they should have requested one from Cleveland. In fact, Newburgh Heights was offered help from the Cleveland Police Department immediately after Kurt's body was found, but they refused. It was also revealed that there was no search conducted of the duplex where Kurt was last seen alive. When asked why the Newburgh Heights PD didn't obtain a search warrant, Chief Lucas said, "We had no reason to search it." Chief Lucas would defend his police department's initial investigation. He thought that it was pretty good considering they didn't have a lot to go on. He said that nobody would talk, we didn't have a cause of death. If they would have given us that, at least we would have something to go on. Lucas says he's positive that there were photos of the original scene. However, to this day, none have ever been found. The Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office investigator James Gutierrez, who reopened the case 9 years later, did not mince words with his opinion on the prior investigation. He said that the initial investigation into Sova's death was a joke. He said that it was unbelievable, and if he had known about this earlier, he probably would have indicted some people for dereliction of duty. He went on to say that the people who ran the Newburgh Heights PD in the 80s ought to be ashamed of themselves. The Newburgh Heights Police Department would continue to make news, but for a shocking reason that was much more far-reaching than their investigation into Kurt Sova's death. At the center of it was Robert Karras, the only detective at Newburgh Heights PD and the person who headed the Sova investigation. Karras was eventually exposed as a drug addict with a record of bludgeoning and stomping handcuffed prisoners. Karras was convicted of beating 5 prisoners in 1988 and 89. On one of the instances, he took a prisoner behind the J.L. Goodman Furniture Warehouse, but the prisoner refused to get out of the car, having already been beaten once by Karras. Remember, behind the J.L. Goodman Furniture Warehouse is where Kurt Sova's body was found. In addition to abusing prisoners, Karras also abused drugs, most notably Percocet, which is a potent and addictive painkiller. He would eventually be convicted on 76 counts of aggravated drug trafficking and illegal processing of drug documents. Karras was fired from the Newburgh Heights PD in January of 1991, and later in 91 was sentenced to 6 to 15 years in prison. 5 months before that, former Newburgh Heights Sheriff Lucas was permanently banned from law enforcement for helping to arrange phony police credentials for a Newburgh Heights dispatcher. Back in 1984, Lucas also pled guilty to dereliction of duty for allowing gambling at a party where he was working off-duty. Kurt Sova's case had now gone decades with no new information or answers about what happened in those 5 days or what exactly caused his death. Then in December of 2019, there would be a surprising announcement. Newburgh Heights Police Department would reopen the investigation into Kurt Sova's death. They announced that they would partner with students studying criminology at Tiffin University to try to find out what happened. Kurt Sova's mysterious death would also be the subject of an event called CrowdSolve, produced by CrimeCon, that took place in late February 2020 in Chicago. CrimeCon is an annual true crime convention, and CrowdSolve is an event designed to pair true crime buffs with law enforcement and criminal forensic experts. It was even reported that actress and singer Selena Gomez and her mother were also in attendance to take a crack at solving the case. The hope with featuring Kurt's case on CrowdSolve was that with fresh eyes on the case, they might uncover more information. The Tiffin University students traveled to Chicago as well to share their findings with others participating in the event. The remaining member of the Sova family would also attend the event. There were theories and possible leads discussed, but despite their best efforts, there was no conclusion or new developments uncovered in Kurt Sova's death. Around the time of CrowdSolve in 2020, Kevin Sova, now the only surviving member of the family, would speak about life without his brother in an article on the CrimeCon website. He remembers his little brother as a comedian with a great sense of humor. He said that he and his other 2 brothers were very protective of Kurt. He was thrilled to get the call from Newburgh Heights Police Department 38 years later, wanting to reopen the case and partner with CrowdSolve. Kevin Sova talked about his now deceased family. His father, Ken Sova, would die in 2001 at the age of 68. Keith died in 2014 at the age of 52. A few months later, Dorothy Sova died of an aneurysm at the age of 76. Kenny died in 2017 of a drug overdose at the age of 57. Sadly, he said that Kenny Sova would lay dead inside the family home for 10 days before he was discovered. As Kevin was going through the house after his brother's death in 2017, he found his mother's files on Kurt's death. He would eventually turn them over to Chief Majoy of the Newburgh Heights Police Department. They were grateful to have the files, and it's nice to know that all of Dorothy Sova's hard work will continue to be used to work on her son's case. As far as my thoughts, there is a lot to unpack with this case. Before I talk about Kurt Sova, I want to talk about Eugene Cavett. I think it is more likely that his death was a tragic accident. I did mention that Eugene's friend told me about the gang that had been bothering him. The only injuries on him, though, were consistent with a fall. Also, in one of the few newspaper articles I found about his death, they said that Eugene Cavett had a mild case of muscular dystrophy. Muscular dystrophy can cause muscle weakness and can also affect your balance, so that could have definitely contributed to an accidental fall. There are some things that seem very likely in Kurt Sova's death, but other things that are cloaked in mystery still to this day. I do think that Kurt was heavily intoxicated. A thin teenager at only around 136 pounds is binge drinking the strongest alcohol that you can buy. Add to that, while already being intoxicated enough to stagger and feel sick, he goes out in 45-degree temperature with only jeans and a t-shirt on for, at the very least, 20 minutes. Kurt's friend said that Kurt had complained of being cold. Was he already suffering from hypothermia? If you were heavily intoxicated, hypothermia could set in less than an hour. The fact that 5 days after the party during the autopsy, Kurt Sova still had a pretty significant blood alcohol level means a few things. Since the .11 BAC isn't high enough to kill someone, I believe that the night of the party, Kurt's BAC was much higher. I believe that he passed out that night, but didn't die until sometime later during the 5 days. According to my research, the liver metabolizes all of the alcohol in your system in a matter of hours. If he had been alive most of the 5 days, his liver would have metabolized the alcohol, and I think his BAC would have been much lower. If he would have died soon after the party, I believe the BAC would have been higher. The combination of extreme alcohol consumption and hypothermia is the perfect storm. At extremely high levels, alcohol depresses the nervous system to the point where breathing can slow down or stop. Add to that the hypothermia that he was probably facing. Alcohol creates a false sensation of warmth, but it actually dilates your blood vessels, which rapidly lowers your body temperature. It also dulls your perception of the cold. Hypothermia in itself can kill you, primarily by causing heart failure. When your body temperature drops, the heart's electrical system becomes unstable, which can lead to irregular heart rhythm, which can then lead to cardiac arrest. Your respiratory center also slows down, leading to shallow breathing, and could stop entirely. Your brain activity slows severely and can lead to loss of consciousness and coma. So you can see how deadly it could be if Kurt were severely intoxicated and suffering from hypothermia. We know for certain that Kurt Sova was intoxicated, and we also know that he was out in the cold, and in fact was cold according to his friend Samuel. The low that night was 45 degrees, and Kurt would have been out late at night when it would have been the lowest temperature. But what if there was another factor that we don't know about? Is it possible that Kurt ingested drugs at the party? We don't know that for a fact. It is just a theory, but it is possible. He was tested for a few kinds of drugs that came back negative, but there are others that I'm sure were not tested for in 1981. Or is it possible that Kurt ingested drugs unwillingly, like if his drink were spiked without his knowledge? If that is true, then add that to the alcohol consumption and frigid temps, and all three combined would make for an extremely dangerous situation for Kurt Sova that night. I've also wondered if Kurt could have had some undiagnosed health condition that contributed to his death. For example, if Kurt had some sort of heart condition that he wasn't aware of, his intoxication and being out in the frigid air could have exacerbated everything, and maybe he suffered cardiac arrest. Of course, the biggest mystery in this case is those 5 days. Had Kurt Sova been found the day after the party, it would make a lot more sense. But what happened during those 5 days, and where was Kurt during them? The scenario I imagine is that when Kurt's friend went in to get his coat, Kurt Sova staggered away from the duplex and at some point collapsed. Perhaps he laid out there long enough for hypothermia to set in. I think that when the people who lived in the duplex saw him unconscious, they panicked and put him in the basement to hide him. Underage Kurt being drunk at a party didn't seem to concern the renters, but an unconscious and underage Kurt certainly might have. Another reason that might support that he was in the basement is that during that time many people were searching for Kurt. If he was just laying out in the wide open, like when he was found, for days, he definitely would have been located. So did Kurt just linger there in the basement for a few days and then die? Maybe they figured that Kurt would sleep it off and then leave on his own, but when they went to check on him, he was dead. According to the coroner, he had only been dead for 24 to 36 hours when he was found, so that leaves a few days where we have no idea what happened. That is the biggest mystery in this case. Did Kurt ever regain consciousness? If so, was he given any food or water? Did anyone even try to help him? It just blows my mind to think that these people would have such a disregard for human life that they would not get medical help for Kurt in those 5 days, well during the time he was still alive anyway. Perhaps they thought he would eventually wake up, but when they went back to check on him, he had died. Or could Kurt have staggered to the basement that night while his friend went to get his coat? If he was feeling sick, maybe he went down the basement stairs and collapsed on the cot. Perhaps they didn't find him for days, but when they did, he was already dead, so they panicked and decided to move his body. I believe that's why Susan called Dorothy Sova very early on the morning that Kurt was found. She was giving her a clue by saying that Kurt may have been in her basement. She knew that the Sovas would rush over there, which they did, and then when he wasn't found, they could prove that Kurt Sova wasn't at their house. Then sometime that same day, they placed Kurt's body out in the open in an area that had already been searched. Is there a chance that Kurt Sova could have been outside the entire 5 days? I will say that anything is possible. There were a lot of people searching for him, so you would think that it would not have taken 5 days to locate him if he were outside the whole time. But people are found all the time near where people had already searched. I do wonder if it's possible that Kurt passed out somewhere in the area, but hidden from view. If he continued to lay there unconscious, then the alcohol effects would leave his body, but the continued hypothermia could have caused his death. I definitely think that Kurt Sova's death was accidental. I have never thought there was any foul play involved. It was just an unfortunate set of circumstances that resulted in the end of a young and promising life. This case is very sad in that it appears, in their response to their family if nothing else, that the people who hosted the party cared nothing about Kurt Sova or his well-being. They also had no compassion for his family that was frantically searching for him. All of their actions that night and the days after seemed to only be focused on protecting themselves. In an article in the Plain Dealer 10 years after her son's death, Dorothy Sova would tearfully say, "It has taken 10 years of our lives. It has literally crushed our family. Sometimes I think I should just take all this stuff," meaning her own files on the case, "and throw it in the fire and get on with my life." Kurt's mother's frustration was evident at 10 years, but we are now at almost 45 years, and there are still no answers in this bizarre and tragic case. Perhaps with renewed attention, we can finally find out what happened late that night, and we can find out more about the proof at the party. That concludes my podcast on Kurt Sova. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a rating or review where you listen to your podcasts. You can find me on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and YouTube Music. You can also read all of my original articles, as well as links to my most recent podcast, on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. I have social media pages under that name on Facebook, X, and Instagram. I also have a Patreon channel under Lost and Found Podcast where I cover missing persons cases that you may have never heard of that you should check out. You can reach me via email at lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.